Amen. All right, as we continue our Bible Heroes series, we're going to look at Queen Esther today and how God was able to use her. And through this whole situation, God protected Esther and saved her life from destruction. If you know the story, Esther was an orphan. Her parents were probably destroyed when Jerusalem came under attack, when it was sieged, and then she was adopted by her uncle Mordecai. But God was able to preserve her through all of this and actually eventually establish her to protect many other lives. So she was preserved and established by God. But what's really interesting about her is that she spoke up for the lives of the innocent when she had the opportunity. She was not selfish. She had an opportunity to open her mouth and save lives, and she did it. God used her for this. Let's look at verse number 17. You're here in Esther chapter 2. Look at verse number 17. The Bible reads, "And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight, more than all the virgins, so that he did set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even according to the state of the king." So what happens? He says, hey, that's the one. She obtains grace and favor in his sight, and that's of God. He says, I'm going to make her king. This one is worthy. And then he makes a great feast. What's interesting, it says, he makes this feast, Esther's feast, then it says, and he made a great release to the provinces and gave gifts, right? And so she found grace in his eyes. She had mercy. I think what's interesting is he gave mercy to other people. When it says he made a release, that means he released some people out of prison, you know? And I think that's interesting. That's what a good wife can do to you, is actually soften up some of those rough edges, right? So this king was probably a hard man, and God said, okay, I've given you a king, and it softens his heart a little bit. Immediately, he begins to release people. So that's kind of the effect of a good wife. I want you to hold your finger here. We're going to come back to Esther, but go to Proverbs chapter 3. I want to deal with this here, how it says that she obtained grace and favor in his sight, because that phrase favor is used several times throughout this entire book of Esther, about her several times. She had favor, she found favor, and she goes to the king and says, if I find favor, then please do this. So what does this mean? Because, you know, we don't play favorites, we're not a respecter of persons, but yet the Bible teaches that she found grace and favor because she feared the Lord. And listen, if we will exalt the fear of the Lord, if we will take it seriously that we need to be afraid of God's judgment on our life, then God will say, hey, you're a worthy person, you're a worthy servant, let me use you, let me elevate you so you can be used of me. And that's what we need to remember, and that's what it's going to teach us here in Proverbs 3, is that if we will fear the Lord, then we will obtain favor with both God and man. You're in Proverbs chapter 3, look at verse number 1. Proverbs 3, verse number 1. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. This verse is important. It starts in your heart. How do we keep God's law? How do we keep his commandments? Well, obedience begins in the heart, right? The battleground is the heart. It's the mind. What's happening in here will play itself out in your life, right? So obedience starts in here. If there's rebellion in your mind, guess what? It's going to play itself out in your life, in your flesh. Well, the same thing with obedience and fear toward God. Look at verse 2. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. So, not forgetting the law, obeying God's law will actually add days to your life. You see what he says there? He says length of days. He says long life. He says peace shall they add to thee. If you obey God, you will live longer on this earth. That's his promise. That's God's blessing. Look at verse number 3. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thy heart. Again, saying that, hey, we need to show mercy when it's appropriate. We need to know the truth out of the Word of God, and it starts in the heart. People that do the right thing, it's because their heart was right. That's where it starts. That's the source. Verse 4. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. So how do we find favor with both God and man. How do we make it when God looks down at us? He's pleased with us. Well, we take heed according to His law. We take it very seriously what God has said. I need to be afraid of God's judgment. I need to take this law, this commandment. I need to put it in my heart. I need to keep it in here. And when the time's appropriate, you need to tell others what God has said. You need to preach the truth, and you need to demonstrate mercy to people when you have an opportunity. It's the fear of the Lord is what He's teaching. And again, obeying in the heart, having mercy, loving the truth, and God will reward you. Look at verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. Now this is a good verse, especially for a time when we have a hurricane bearing down on us, right? Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, right? Don't trust in the newscaster. Don't trust in your, I've got storm windows, I should be okay. No, what are you trusting in? God. What are you trusting in? God. You know, we have a huge tree in our backyard. It's 60, 70, 80 foot tall. And, you know, I was telling Naomi, well, if the tree falls on the house, that's because God wants us to have a new house. So, worst case, we have nothing to fear. God will protect us. We're going to fear God. We're going to make sure we're right with God. Yeah, we're going to be prayed up. We're going to be thanking God for protection. And whatever happens, we know that God can use us even through a difficult time, through a storm. Right? And the application here is with Esther. She was going through a storm, wasn't she? Right? And she wasn't going to the forecasters. She wasn't, well, you know, this is such a unique situation. I'll do whatever. No, she was being obedient to God. She was right in her heart. She remained righteous through this entire situation. And God used her mightily. We trust in the Lord with all our heart. We lean not to our own understanding. Why? Verse 6. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. Verse number 6 is very important. In all thy ways. When you're at work, you need to acknowledge God. When you're around family, when you're around friends that are not saved, and you know they don't want to hear the Bible, in all thy ways acknowledge God, and He shall direct thy paths. We are called to give a testimony. This is very important. If you're afraid of God, imagine if God has a divine appointment and you meet somebody, your paths cross, and you have 5 minutes with them, and you feel like, well, I don't want to make them feel awkward because I'll talk about God, or I know they won't hear it anyway, right? What are you doing? You're making excuses for not speaking up. In all thy ways acknowledge God. Well, you know what? I'm so thankful to God that I crossed paths with you. Let me ask you this. If you were to die today, are you 100% sure you go to heaven? Right? Let me ask you, I mean, think about it. You cross paths with people you wouldn't otherwise meet, and God has appointed it. God has given you the breath in your lungs, and He's given you the Holy Spirit in your heart. To why? To preach the gospel, to acknowledge Him in all thy ways. Go back to Esther chapter 1. And listen, Esther found grace in the eyes of God because she acknowledged God in all of her ways. She was afraid of the judgment of God more than the judgment of man. And that's the lesson we're going to learn from her. She found grace in the eyes of King Ahasuerus because her heart was right before God. And listen, just one person can save many lives, or just one person can destroy many lives, right? One sinner destroyeth much good, amen, right? But one person can stand in the gap and spare an entire nation, stop the bloodshed of a lot of people. Think about this. You're going back to Esther 1. So what's unique about her is that she wasn't selfish in that time of need. When it was very important, when it all came down to her, she kind of said, well, if I perish, I perish, right? My life matters nothing at this point. I need to do what's right. Because listen, selfishness could have prevented her from being used by God. And that's always the thing. When you cross paths with somebody and you don't speak up and you don't acknowledge God in all your ways, after the fact, you're kicking yourself. You're regretting it. Why didn't I just say something? I had a chance. Who knows when I'll see Him again, right? In all thy ways, acknowledge God, and He shall direct thy paths. You're back in Esther chapter 1. Look at verse number 4. When He showed the riches, now, so He has a big feast. It says, when He had showed the riches of His glory, a glorious kingdom, and the honor of His excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. 180 days. All right, math whiz. How many days is that? How much? 180, right? 180 days. That's half of a year. He showed a feast for 180 days to His princes, His governors, all the rulers, all the powers He had appointed. 180 days, half a year. Look at verse 5. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan and in the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden by the king's palace. So next he does a 7-day feast. 180 days, he has all of the kings and princes from his 127 countries come for this, and then he puts on a 7-day feast for all the people present in the city. Jump to verse 9. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So she is also throwing her own feast in his house, mind you, right? And look what happens. So the king commands, look at verse 11, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. So she's in his house with his crown, and he says, bring my queen, and I want to compliment her before all the people of the city. We've just had a major feast with all the leaders of the world here, and now just to the city, I'm feasting and I'm benefiting all of the people here in the city, and I want them to honor my queen. I want to show them and compliment them how much I love her and how beautiful she is and what I think about her. Problem is, her heart's not right. Look at verse 12. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. What in the world was going through her mind? Yeah. On what power was she having? Oh, I'm too busy. I'm having my own feast. I can't come right now. Right? Her real inner beauty was shown. Right? Her ugliness was shown in her refusal of the king's commandment. She shows how ugly she really is on the inside. Oh, I'm too busy. I'm having my own feast. I'm showing off to the other ladies in the kingdom. I don't have time to go answer the king. Right? What a damaging thing that she does here. A rebellious woman is a very dangerous thing. In Proverbs it says, she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. Why does it say here the king was wroth and his anger burned inside of him? Imagine he's before it and he says, hey, let me show you how wonderful my queen is. And then the answer comes back. He wants to compliment her and say, look at her. And then the answer comes back, I'm not coming. I refuse your commandment. What a slap in the face. He's angry, right? He's ashamed. He's ashamed now. Well, what do I have to do? He calls for the wise men. They go through this, right? In Proverbs 11 it says, as a jewel of gold in a swine's snout, so is a fair woman which is without discretion. This woman that didn't have the discretion, she didn't know when to open her mouth or shut her mouth. She disobeyed the king in public and made it a big spectacle. She's like a pig with a jewel in its nose. Well, don't you see the beautiful jewel? No, I see a pig. Right? Right? Can you imagine being married to Miss Piggy? Right? What a miserable marriage. And that's what she does. She acts like mouthy Miss Piggy. She wants to say, no, this is what I want to do. Well, listen, that's not a godly woman. That's not how it ought to be. Look at verse 16. Look what happens. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. He says, she didn't just offend you, king. She didn't just disrespect you. She's caused a problem to all the people now. She's hurt everybody with her actions, with her wicked heart. Verse 17, for this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes. When it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Can you imagine? He's saying, not just in this city Shushan, not just the princess, but all the people in all the provinces, they're going to say, well, if the queen don't have to answer the king, then why should I answer you? I'm going to despise you and the authority that you have over me. I want to do it my way. Man, oh man, I mean, this sure sounds like the women of today, does it not? Thank God there are some righteous ladies in this world. Thank God there are some women that still love the Lord, because the majority of the people in the world, their heart is like this. They want to say, look at me, I'm doing it my way. Forget everybody else. They want to be selfish. Me, me, me. Well, we as Christians, we're called to serve one another. We're called to lay our life down for one another. That's the Christian way. Amen. Look at verse number 18. He says, likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. He's saying this is such a big deal, it's going to cause chaos throughout the kingdom. How can we get anything done when everybody has an argument at home? Contempt and wrath, this is not good. We need to squash this, we need to deal with this, and we need to do it righteously and set an example. Verse 19, if it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. He says, hey, you don't want to come when the king calls? Then don't bother ever coming again. You're out. You're done. Whoa. Okay, lady, you got what you wanted. You happy? No, now she wasn't. Now she's probably begging. She's probably crying. I'll come now. I'm ready. Too late. Why didn't you obey when it was right? And he says, but don't worry, right? God's going to send someone that's better than her. And he does. God's using Esther. Now, Esther is a righteous woman, and God is using this opportunity to put a righteous woman in the kingdom to help preserve life. And we don't see it yet in the story. We know it because we know this story. Let's continue reading in verse 20. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both great and small. He says, wives, don't just honor your husband if he's somebody. Listen, honor your husband if he's your husband, period. Well, he's just small in the totem pole. He's just a nobody. Obey him, honor him as if to the Lord, right? We need to obey. This is God's method. This is God's structure. Verse 21. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to the people after their language. Listen, here's what he's saying, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. Now we're going to come back to Esther, but go to 1 Peter chapter 3. So what does he say here? What is sent out to prevent the chaos and the contempt and the strife throughout the kingdom, to prevent things from breaking down, that all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both to great and small, right? And it says that every man should bear rule in his own house. Now God needs somebody that will answer this call, and that's going to be Esther. We don't ever see Esther disobeying or rebelling against this command, right? We know from Genesis that God has an order, and we see it all the way throughout the Bible. Well, Vashti failed to represent her king, didn't she? Vashti failed to represent her kingdom. The people in the kingdom, she offended them. She sinned against them. But God had a better queen in the way. And listen, we're not going to talk any more about Vashti, but there are a lot of moms like that in this world. There are a lot of wives like that in this world, and shame on them. Shame on them. God's going to brag on Esther because of her characteristics, and the Vashti types, let the world have them. Right? We don't need, right? But God will elevate and give favor and grace to those that are more like Esther. Because you think about, she didn't obey her king, and she disrespected her kingdom. Man, you think about how many moms just, they fail to take care of their children. They fail to take care of their husband. It's sad today, and we need more godly women, and thank God there are some. Look at 1 Peter chapter 3. Look at verse number 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. So wives, be in subjection to your own husband, not just any man. In fact, there's a reason the word "your" is in there. Thank God for the King James Bible, where they don't just delete whole verses and words that matter. It doesn't just say be in subjection to man or a husband. No, your husband. You have your husband, and you need to be in subjection to him. If you're subject to your husband, then you're not going to be subject to another man. And this is important. When you look at the next verse, right? He says, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. Now, conversation means your walk and your talk when it's used in the King James Bible. It's not just what you say, it's what you do. Both of those fall into that term. It's your walk and your talk. That's your conversation. But the type of conversation this godly woman has is chaste. chaste. If you look up this word, it means they're pure. In fact, the opposite of this word is sensuous or defiled, right? Instead of being a defiled wife, instead of being a sensuous wife, always moving by the emotions and always lusting after things that aren't there, she's saying, women, you need to be chaste. A chaste lifestyle. Why? Subject to your own husband. Right? Think of what he's saying here. Their structure, get it in order. Look at verse 3. Whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting of the hair, and of wearing of gold, or of putting on of apparel. Right? Boy, Vashti, she was fair, was she not? But that's the outward. Because what was she on the inside? She was ugly. It was rottenness as to his bones. And he was ashamed of her. Verse 4. But let it be the hidden man of the heart. Now that's who you really are. That is your person. That is your personality. That's the type of person you are. That's the hidden man of the heart. Who are you really? Who are you really? Whether you're kind or cruel, those things come out over time. You don't always see them initially. But here, this is saying, what's true beauty? It's the hidden man of the heart. The hidden woman of the heart, if you will, in application, right? Because that's who he's talking to, his ladies here. He says, let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible. In other words, your hair will corrupt, your gold will corrupt, your possessions, it's all going to fall away. Your hair is going to fall out. You're going to get old and ugly. It is what it is. Life will go on, okay? But God's saying, who you really are as a person, if you're beautiful, I don't care what age, if you're a beautiful person, then you're always going to be beautiful, right? He says, hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even an ornament, a decoration of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. Meek. Now, Moses was a meek person. He had presence, he had power, but he was also humble. He didn't have to come in and tell you he was in charge. He held his peace. He spoke when he needed to, right? So here for a lady, what he's talking about, the ornament. What's the decoration that makes you a beautiful lady? It's being meek. It's being quiet. Knowing when to hold your peace. He says, which in the sight of God is of great price. Great value. Great godly value is purity and holiness. When God looks down at a person, He values the purity, how they've kept themselves pure and how they desire to be holy more than anything else. More than anything else. I spent $100 on my makeup, on my hair job, on this. I spent $400 on my new dress. God says, I don't care. What's in here matters the most. You have a desire to be pure. You have a desire to be holy. God says, I love that. I love that. You're willing to be quiet and serve your husband. That's beautiful. That's valuable, is what God is saying here. That's true wealth. And a husband that has a wife like that, oh man, you've got it made. Forget the cars and the houses. You've got the best thing in the world. There is nothing better than that. In Proverbs 31, we'll be reading this here in the next couple weeks as we continue our Proverbs series, but he says, in verse 10, he says, who can find a virtuous woman? These days it is hard, I'll admit. Years ago, I used to say, who can find a virtuous woman? Not me. I can't, right? Well, thank God I did. He gave me a virtuous woman. He says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. He said, man, if you had a pile of rubies, you'd give them all away for that one woman you can trust. For that one that you know her heart is right. She fears God. She wants to serve God. It's worth it all. What else? Rubies, gold, silver? I'll go find something else. What else does it cost? I'll get it. Is what he's saying. He says, who can find a virtuous woman? Her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. And we're going to see that characteristic in Esther as we move forward. She did Ahasuerus good. She didn't worry about the rest of the details. She just did him good. She did right by God. She feared God in every situation, and God was able to use her. Look in 1 Peter 3, look at verse 5. For after this manner, in the old time, were the holy women also, who trusted in God, adorned themselves, being in subjection to their own husbands. Again, we talked about an ornament. You could say, I have adorned myself with a jacket today. Well, what did the godly women do? They adorned themselves being in subjection to their husband. That was beautiful, and everybody could see it. That was the example that was set forth for us. Their beauty was their obedience. Their beauty was the fear of God. And that's better than the pride of life. You know, they weren't defiled like the others. They weren't sensuous like the rest of the ladies. They were, or women, they were actually a lady, right? Look at verse number 7. Likewise, ye husbands, I got to point the guns at you guys for a minute, to us. It's only fair because that's what the chapter does, right? Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. He says, hey, it's teamwork. You need to honor that woman. You need to encourage her and lift her up and know who she is. Don't just, well, we dwell together, but we don't know much about each other. Well, that's not okay. Not according. You need to know who she is. You need to appreciate who she is. And you need to honor her. You need to protect her as being heirs together. We're working in this together as a team to bring up the next generation. And God's blessing that and protecting that. And that way, men, your prayers are not hindered. Man, if you ever feel like, man, I just feel like my prayers are hitting the ceiling. I'm saying the same thing over and over, and I'm not getting an answer. Well, when's the last time you honored your wife?
That's good.
When's the last time you made it a point to let her know that you loved her? That's what we're commanded to do. Love doesn't come easy for men. Not as easy as it does ladies. We're made different. And so God gave us different commandments. God gave us a very clear instruction, men. We need to remember that. If you've got a virtuous woman and she's taking care of you and you trust in her, don't forget about her. Don't leave her out on the back porch. Man, put her at the forefront. You know what I mean? Do everything you can to say, hey, we're in this together, baby. Let's come on, right in the front seat. This is our mission that God's given us. Let's work together. Let's strive together. Let me honor you and protect you and love you.
That's good.
Verse 8, look at this. Finally, be ye all of one mind. That's hard to do, to be in unison, but that's what we're commanded to do. Having compassion one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous. Now, be pitiful means to show pity, show courtesy. Try to still open that door. Oh, honeymoon's over. Oh, no, let me get that door for you, right? Open the door. Show some courtesy. Show some pity to your wife. Having compassion. Now, the love as brethren is very interesting because as men, sometimes it's just like, yeah, I love old brother so-and-so. We're on the same page. We're like bros. And it's like, well, you know, you ought to treat your wife just like that too. This doesn't come natural. Otherwise, it wouldn't be commanded. This is something we have to work at, right? If you have an Esther, make sure you're treating her like this. If you want your wife to be better at being like an Esther, make sure you're upholding, being in one mind, working together. Look at verse 9. Not rendering evil for evil, railing for railing, but contrariwise, blessing. Right? Railing for railing. That's, when somebody starts fighting. So one of the two says something, the other one needs to not return fire. Yeah, but you did that. No, you just need to forgive it and move on. You need to try to end the argument. Blessed be the peacemakers. Not railing for railing. That's what destroys marriages. That's when you're not of one mind. That's when you're not being heirs together. When you're returning railing for railing. When you're always looking for something else to say, you're not at peace. You're not at peace, and God wants the marriage to work. He says, not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise, blessing. Knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. Now go back to Esther chapter 2. Esther chapter 2. God teaches us through His Word that a beautiful woman is one that is pure, both in body and in mind. And we're going to see that with Esther. She was pure. But her mind was right also. Her heart was right toward God, and therefore God made sure that she found favor everywhere she went. God took care of her. She is an obedient woman. You're in Esther chapter 2. Look at verse number 2. Then said the king's servant that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, right? So what they have to be pure right away. Esther is brought in this situation because she is one that is pure. And again, because she strived to please God, she was blessed at every turn, right? So then we see she's delivered to the keeper. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip some verses. Go to verse number 9. She's delivered to the keeper, and it says, and the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. Why is she getting blessed there? Because God's taking care of her. God's opening doors. She's fearing the Lord as she was taught, and guess what? God's opening the doors for her. It says, she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification. with such things as belong to her, and 7 maidens. Now, he's like, and, oh, by the way, let me get you 7 servants to help you. What? Who is she to deserve that? Well, she's somebody to God. She's somebody to God. That's a daughter of the Most High, and he's making sure he's putting everything together so that the doors will open for her and that she's blessed. He says, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. He says, not only that, he put her in the best room, took care of everything. And God was blessing her for her purity and also her obedience. Jump to verse 15. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing. Now the story says he provided everything that these women wanted. There's no telling what kind of stuff they brought. But she said, nope, I need nothing. She came in with nothing. She goes out with nothing. So I've got God. What else do I need, right? She wasn't greedy. Oh, here's what I want you to do. I want the fanciest dress. I need big gold earrings. I need some bling. No, she required nothing. Her confidence was in the Lord, right? She required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the woman, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Again, this goes back to her heart, who she was as a person. Why were people so pleased with her? Because she wasn't greedy, she wasn't mouthy, she wasn't always me, I want this, I need this, I'm going to do that. No, she was probably meek and humble, right? She was an ornament of grace was around her, obviously. Look at verse, when it says that she required nothing except what he appointed, it makes me think of high maintenance, right? We've all heard that phrase. I used to have a car. Man, this thing was high maintenance. Okay? I mean, I had to stop. At red lights, I'd have to stop and pop the hood and jump it. I mean, you had better check the oil before you leave the house because you never know, it could just die on the side of the road, right? That was back in my college. I used to have a car like that. And that's high maintenance, right? Well, you don't want a wife that's high maintenance, do you? You don't want a wife, hey, come on, we're going to go over here. Why? Where are we going? What are we going to do? We just need to go. Hold on, you got to stop and get me a Starbucks first. Oh, come on. You know? Think about it, right? We don't want a woman like that. We want a woman like Esther who's willing to say, whatever you want, Lord. God will provide. I don't need much, right? Think about it. And God blessed her for her having, not demanding things, right? She began to find favor with people. Look at verse 16. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the crown royal upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Again, he had somebody better in mind. We got rid of Vashti, right? And here's an interesting thing we're going to see in this chapter also. She was loyal to her husband. She took it very seriously. I have a job now. I am the queen. I must take care of the king. Whatever he says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to honor him. I'm going to respect him. She was dependable. She was trustworthy. Look at verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. She was like, hey, you need to know this, king. She went out of her way to make sure he was protected. She certified it. She's swearing. She is swearing is what, she is saying, your life is in danger. I've been told you need to find out. This is important, right? She's being dependable and trustworthy. Look at verse 23. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, therefore, that they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the kings. Go to chapter 3. So as the story develops, and again, we're going to skip some just for the sake of time this morning, but Haman he sought to destroy all of the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom. He convinced the king of something and he gets permission. He writes this letter, we're going to kill all the Jews. And listen, the Jews are God's people in the Bible here. The Jews were the people that feared God, that believed in the one true God, especially here in Shushan. The other people had the wrong God. Right? Now we know from other stories in the Bible, the Jews were used to bring the testimony of the one true living God throughout the entire world. Right? The Jews were really just a picture of what the church is today. That was the foreshadowing of what we really are, which is a body of believers. Right? So them back then, they were used to bring the witness of God and the truth of the gospel and the scriptures all around the world. So this was a big deal. Like, we're going to kill all of God's people. Whoa. Now, you think God's just going to sit by and let that happen, or do you think God's going to protect His people? Well, don't you know this hurricane's coming? Hey, listen, God's in the hurricane. That's God's storm. We're not going to worry about the hurricane.
That's right. Yeah.
You're in chapter 3. Look at verse 13. And the letters were sent by post unto all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Go to chapter 4, verse 13. Little children? This wicked Haman wants to kill even the little children. Now that's wicked. These people, but you know, here's the beauty of Esther. She was willing to lay her life down for someone else. She was willing to lay her own life on the line to save others. Look at chapter 4, verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not within thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the other Jews. Listen, this is what makes her beautiful. This is what makes her a Bible hero, is her selflessness. She was willing to stand for the truth. She was willing to protect life. And this is the same picture of a mother. Isn't that what a mom does?
Yeah.
I mean, just in the act of having birth, you lay your very life on the line. And now you're given a child. Now what? Well, now you lay your life on the line every day, and you preserve that life, you raise that life, you teach that child the fear of the Lord.
Yep.
That's beautiful. That's true beauty. Moms are beautiful. Vashti is not. They're serving their family. That's what makes them a hero. So here as this happens, he says, hey, don't think you can't lay your life down. God's going to do something. Watch what he says in verse 14. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. He's saying God's going to deliver His people one way or another because He is God. These people are nothing. He says, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Such a time as this. Man, when there's a point in your life where you're at a decision and you kind of halt between two opinions, man, I don't know, should I go this way? Should I keep the way I'm going? It looks like God's opening a door. Man, who knows? Are you brought to this for such a time as this? Is this the answer to your prayer, but you don't quite see it yet? Because her answer to Mordecai was, if I go to the king, I could be killed. And he says, you're going to be killed anyway. God will deliver His people. Maybe He chose you to be part of the deliverance. Maybe He wants to bless you and bring enlargement to His people through you. Now she's at a point of, but I could die. And she says, you know what? I'm going to die anyway. I'm going to fear God. I'm not going to fear them or what they're going to do. And God was able to use this situation. God brought you here for a reason. And you know, thank God she didn't hold her peace. Well, they're going to kill little children? Well, I better not speak up. Maybe they won't find out I'm a Jew. That's what she could have done. That's not what she did. Well, God saved Queen Esther for opening her mouth. Look at this, verse 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. She knows there's power in prayer and fasting. She knows there's power in asking someone else to pray. Look, I have a direct line, but so do you. So do you, so do you, so do you, right? Hey, what if we all make that phone call? God, we need your help. God, we want your blessing on this church. What can we do? Give us wisdom. Give us instruction. Give us the fear of the Lord. So she says, hey, you know what? Get everybody on board. I want everybody to fast for me. I need help. I'm going to lay my life on the line, and if I die, so what? I'm going to do the right thing. That was a great attitude, and the wisdom that she gets from seeking God first is evident in how this story plays out. Look at verse 17. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So she's fasting, they're fasting for 3 days, they're not eating, and they're just praying to God. God, you can open a door in this situation. We need help. And there's one person at the tip of the spear, and it's a young lady. That's what God chose to do. God can deliver many lives through one person, even if it's just a young lady. Look at chapter 5, verse 1. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. Where did that favor come from? From God. From her fear of God, God said, don't worry, I'll take care of you. I'll open that door. I'll protect you. She obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. What a statement. Man, if your wife ever comes to you, hey, I need some money. Baby, you can take half of my wallet. You can have half of the kingdom. Hey, it's just a credit score. We can't take it to heaven with us. Go ahead. Get what you want. Now, wait. Now, this is a pretty bold statement. He's like, I don't know what you want, but you have such favor that God is showing me whatever you need, we're going to take care, even half of my kingdom. He's saying, I'll give you all that I can. Everything that I can do for you, I'm going to do. God is obviously blessing her. He's opening this door. Why? She prayed. She fasted. She was afraid. She sought for wise counsel. She asked for her friends, pray with me, will you? I've got something going on. Will you pray and fast with me? I need some help. There is power in prayer and fasting, and that's important. We need to not forget that. Amen. When you have a major petition in life to God, seek Him by afflicting your flesh. Pray, fast, ask others to help you. Look at this, verse 4. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Now that's an interesting statement. Why didn't she just lay it all out right there? Well, she's being led of the Lord. Listen, sometimes a fool just utters his whole mouth, right? Everything in his heart. But she was being, I believe, filled with the Spirit, speaking with the power of God, and she was using gentleness and kindness. She's being meek. She wasn't a demanding person. She wasn't a greedy person. I mean, you think about it, if somebody just said, oh, you want half of my kingdom, half the kingdom? Well, I was here for another cause, but yeah, I mean, I'll take, what do you have, you know? Can I have Euphrates? You know, I mean, what would you do, right? Go to Esther chapter 7. Again, we're going to skip some here. Meanwhile, Haman begins to build these gallows to hang Mordecai. Oh, he hates him. He despises him. He wants to have him, the man, killed right away, even before getting all the Jews killed. But then the king can't sleep, and he's reading the account. They're reading to him, and they read this back, how Mordecai spared his life. He knew of the conspiracy, and he saved his life. So God uses this very unique situation where Haman is coming to the king to say, let me get this Mordecai hung now. I want him dead now. Meanwhile, the king had just read the account. He's like, this man saved my life. What have we done to honor him? Who's in the court? It's the guy coming to kill Mordecai. And he says, what would you do to somebody that the king wants to appreciate? And him in his own pride, Haman says, well, I would lead him through the city and put on the best robe and let everybody know this is the guy that the king likes, right? Not knowing it's his very enemy that the king wanted him to play all this out on. So he is humbled by honoring Mordecai, the guy he just built at the gallows to have killed. So God elevates Mordecai in the king's heart. Well, Mordecai becomes afraid. Right? First he's going home boasting, and his family's like, yay, you're winning. And then they're like, uh-oh, you're going to die. And then they come and grab him and take him into this feast. Well, meanwhile, Esther, she's wise with her words. She's patient. She's humble. She's wise with how she presents herself and handles herself. And she's graceful to ask the king what's really on her heart. Look at chapter 7, verse number 1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again to Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Wait, there he goes with half the wallet thing again. I mean, what's this guy thinking? Boy, she really had him by the heartstrings, didn't she? You know? But when you have a good woman, you don't care. It's worth it. He didn't care about rubies or treasure. He had a woman he could trust, unlike Vashti. Look at verse 3. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me. Notice she's still not demanding. He says, whenever it is, again, I'll give it to you, I promise. And she's still humbly saying, if it pleases you, king, if I found favor, if it pleases you, can I have my life? Again, if she came in demanding, if straight out of the gate she says, they're trying to kill us, what are you going to do about it? You need to go fit. No. She comes in humbly, patiently. I need your help. Will you help me? Will you come to my banquet first? Well, what is it? I know you need something. What is it? Well, if it pleases you, can I have my life? Look what she says. And if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. God had preserved her to this point for this reason, for the salvation of many lives, of the lives of her kindred. And she was bold to ask it, not afraid of losing her life, but she still wasn't pushy. Right? She still wasn't just demanding anything, recognizing I'm to be in subjection to him. Verse 4, she continues, for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, and to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen or bondwoman, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. She's saying, if they were still alive, but we were in servitude, I wouldn't have said a thing, but this is our very lives. Right? She's saying it's life and death we're talking about here. Verse 5. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? Coming out, he's like, somebody who hates you in their heart, who is it? Let me know, I want to get him. Verse 6, with boldness she says, and Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. The Haman was afraid before the king. He's like, it's this wicked guy. He's the one. He wants to kill me and all my people. Yeah, bomb drop. Drop the mic. Now what, Haman, right? Because he was about to have Mordecai put to death. He didn't know the connection. God kept it secret for this time. God protected her through all this, elevated her because he knew she'll be faithful. She's afraid of me. She'll obey me. She'll be subject to her husband. She'll find favor because she's an obedient woman, because she's pure. God used this situation. It's real. This adversary, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. She doesn't hold back at all. She doesn't mince words. She just lays it out. It's him. He's the enemy. He's the enemy. He's the adversary. Right? That's the name for the devil, right? Look at verse 7. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen. For he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then the king said, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. The servants come in and they sack him. They put a bag over his head, tie him up. Don't worry, king, don't even look at his face. We're going to take care of this guy. Pretty serious what happens. Obviously, the king takes his authority, the ring and everything. But look at this. And his servants, because they're there to serve the king, look at the next statement that comes out. Very timely. Verse 9. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, right? Imagine he points out the window. He says, behold, also, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. Imagine, the servant points to the window. Behold also, 50 cubits high, this man has built a gallows to hang the guy that you just honored. The guy that has spoken well of you and saved your life, this Haman, wants to kill him also. Yeah. Can you imagine? He's like, first he wants to kill your queen, now he wants to kill Mordecai. The king didn't take any, oh yeah, put him on there. Hang him, right? Look at this, verse 8, he says, 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. King's like, that'll do. Put this guy to death. Look, it goes on, the story goes on where she asks him again, can we reverse the writings of the letters that he did? Can we spare our people? And they do, they write letters and they say, hey, the Jews need to stand and fight and defend themselves. And yet there's another feast that happens because of all that. But look, Esther's the hero of this story. Esther's the hero of this story because her heart is right before God. She's afraid of God. She wanted to be pure. She wanted to honor God. She was obedient. She was willing to stop and pray and fast before acting in a major way. You know, the king could obviously trust in her. The king found favor in her because of all of these things, because of these characteristics. But what I think is just so beautiful is that she was willing to open her mouth and defend the innocent. That's a characteristic you don't see in a lot of people. Somebody that'll open their mouth and defend somebody. That's a godly characteristic. Well, who am I? What can I say? It doesn't matter. Do you have the Holy Spirit? Do you know the truth? Open your mouth and say what's right. And God will bless that. He always does. Thank God for Queen Esther. What an awesome story. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this great Bible hero. Lord, I pray that you would help the young ladies in this church learn from her example and stay pure and fear you and search for you